So Hernan, if you would do that, and that will kick us off for tonight. Thank you.
Muy buenas noches. Tenemos una junta vecinal del Departamento de Educación del Estado de Tennessee. Estoy aquí para interpretarles a todos ustedes. Lo que necesiten de mis servicios pueden recibir toda la atención que ustedes necesiten. Gracias.
Thank you so much. And now I'll formally introduce Director of Schools Eddie Pruitt to welcome us to the space.
Thank you, Chelsea. And good evening, everybody. It's so good to see you. I'm Eddie Pruitt. I'm the Director of Schools for Gibson County Special School District, and we're excited to have you here at Gibson County High School. I want to thank Mr. Hughes and his staff for getting everything set up. I'm not a huge tech guy, so I appreciate him getting all the microphones and everything going well. So hopefully everything goes well tonight. Also, I want to thank you, parents, students, stakeholders. We appreciate you being here tonight to partake in this huge time that we have to have an impact on how students are funded in Tennessee. We know that our communities depend on the success of our schools and depend on the success of our students, and we know that having this meaningful conversation will bear fruit. So thank you again for being here, and I appreciate your attendance, and I'll turn it over to Chelsea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Pruitt. We are going to go ahead and get started with our evening. I will introduce myself. My name is Chelsea Crawford, Chief of Staff at the Tennessee Department of Education. Really want to begin by thanking you all for coming out tonight and spending a little bit of time. It is definitely time out of your personal lives and schedules on Thanksgiving week, and we definitely take note of that. So thank you all for being here with us. It's a little chilly. It's just about coverall weather, and I know that makes it a little bit harder to get out in the afternoon too. I want to tell you just a little bit about how tonight will go before I invite Commissioner Penny Schwinn to set the stage for our conversation. We have done 6 of these public town halls so far, so you guys are our next to last public town hall. We will have one more. We are really here tonight to talk about the future. It is a very exciting time for education in our state. Certainly, there is no shortage of opportunity for us all to share about what we would love to see for our public school students, public school funding in the state of Tennessee in the future. We really want to hear about your hopes and your dreams for what that might look like. I want to point out on the screen behind me the QR code. When you all were walking in, you also had an opportunity to scan that code to sign up to speak tonight. Really want to encourage those of you who have not yet signed up to do so at this time. We really want to hear from as many of you as we possibly can. I know that we could stay all night because this is a subject that is very near and dear to all of our hearts. But we're essentially going to give everybody a couple of minutes to speak. We are going to have a couple of my team members who are running microphones tonight. That's Scott Meltzer in the suit here, and then Victoria Robinson, who will be bringing microphones out to you. What I will do is when we get ready for public comment, I will call the name of the first person to speak. I'll just ask that person to raise their hand. We'll bring a microphone to you. Then I will call the name of the person who is on deck next to speak. We'll bring that person a microphone so that we can make the best use of our time here. I will step away from the microphone when it's your time to speak. And when your 2 minutes is up, I'll step back. So that's my friendly reminder just to give you a flag on time and to have you wrap up your comments. So of course, while the Department of Education is very excited to work with you all on this opportunity, to discuss the state's funding formula for public education, before we begin, the department would like to remind you all of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded and at what levels. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees or subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. So I've just said a lot of words. I want to reiterate one more time that what we are here today to talk about is the future of our public school students and the future of public school funding in the state of Tennessee. So with that, I will invite Commissioner Penny Schwinn to come up and talk to us a little bit about the conversation that we want to have tonight. One last call to sign up for speaking opportunities, and with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Schwinn.
Hello, good evening. It's nice to see you all out here and everyone on social media. I know that we've gotten a lot of good comments from folks who are streaming the town hall. My name is Penny Schwinn. I'm commissioner here in the state of Tennessee, and I'm thrilled to be able to have this conversation and a dialogue about what we want and what could be possible in the future. I think one of the things that we've heard, especially over the first few town halls and frankly over this first month of public engagement, is that there is a lot of appetite and growing appetite to have a very real action-oriented conversation on what can be, what could be, to dream together and to think big together. Now, I think over the last 18 months, we've also noticed it's been really easy to learn how to pick things apart, and it's a lot harder to build and to create. What we want to do here is we're thinking about the future. We're thinking about what could be. We are thinking about individual students and all of our students here in the great state of Tennessee and what we want for them. What do we want to be true about public schools in this state? What do we want to ensure is possible for every single child, regardless of where they live? Whether that's in one of our urban communities, a suburban community, a rural community, grade level and grade band, what kind of opportunities do we want to present to them? What kinds of futures do we want to build? A school funding formula allows us to do that. We've got a lot of superintendents in the audience, which I'm thrilled to see, and the leaders in our districts who help to steward and make those decisions along with county commissions, school boards, and others. And one of the most important things that we do in state policy and that the General Assembly does every year is they think about the budget and they think about how we fund public schools. And that requires transparency. It requires candor in reporting. It means that we have to know what it is that we are trying to accomplish and how our funding formula supports those big goals. Now, what we're talking about in terms of a new formula is what's called a student-based formula. Now, I want to separate that way over here from money follows the kid. Those are two different conversations. A student-based funding formula is one that looks at the needs of the individual student and ensures that those needs are met so that student can meet the minimum expectations that are set by the state. Money follows the student is a different kind of policy. That's what happens once the money is allocated. For this conversation, we are only talking about the formula itself. How do we want public schools to be funded? What do we think is important? What kind of accountability, reporting, and transparency do we want to be part of that process? So for a student-based funding formula, there's a couple of components. There's what's called a base, and that's no matter where you live, here is how much money is funded for your child's education. And then it thinks about what are the other things that we would want to ensure are funded. We think about children with disabilities. What kind of funding do students with disabilities need? We think about English learners, economically disadvantaged students, students in rural communities. Students have very different needs based on where they live. I think we learned a lot this summer about transportation costs. Now that's going to look a lot different in a really big rural county than it is in a very small city or in a suburb. And so we have to take all of that into account when we say no matter whether you're living in Northwest Tennessee or Northeast Tennessee or South Central Tennessee, that if you are a high school student, you have access to work-based learning opportunities. That if you're living in a rural community, you have a way to get to school every day. That if you are a young student, you are able to read on grade level by third grade. What does it take to ensure that those outcomes are real and true for every single student? So what we're asking for today is as much feedback as we can get in this first round of public comment to last about 3.5 months, is what is it that you want to be sure is included in the conversation? What kind of feedback do you want to give about your children, your experiences, what you think is necessary in order to provide every child with the education that he or she deserves to be successful after they graduate? And we have heard a lot of things. This is our 7th town hall, and they've been just wonderful because we have heard feedback from parents and teachers, students themselves, superintendents, business leaders, community members, etc. We've heard a lot about the need to really think about students with disabilities. We've heard about nurses and counselors, school psychologists. We've heard about rigor, especially in the youngest grades, because every child deserves to read. We've been able to hear a lot of that, and now what we're trying to do is build what does that take for every single student. And again, every single student's going to look different. We need to make sure we are funding what that child needs to reach the goals we've set for them. Part of what we get out of this, when we're talking about school funding, when we're talking about a state education system and how we fund that, is we want to ensure that at the end, when we're looking back 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that we've made decisions rooted in clear principles that are driven by the needs of children, for children to be successful, and that the funding system that we have, when you put money into it, you know where it goes, you can be accountable to those dollars, and it has led to transformational change and significantly stronger achievement for all students who enter that system. Our kids deserve that kind of transparency, our kids deserve that kind of accountability, and certainly they deserve to know, as our families do, exactly how the dollars we put towards public education are supporting achievement. We've got a lot of schools doing a lot of hard work, especially over the last 18 months. We've gotten some really incredible feedback from people across the entire state of Tennessee. I do want to say thank you for those folks who have been submitting comments online through watching the town halls. I also want to let you know I am reading every single public comment. That's why my voice is a little hoarse, because I'm staying up late reading every single one. And I think what I've seen to be true on every single comment, no matter what, is it's about kids. And that's what this is really about. It's a conversation about children, about students, the legacy we want to set for those who will come after us, and the vision of what we want to be true for each and every one of them. So I welcome your feedback. I'm excited to hear more about what you want for education in this state, how we are going to together move the state forward, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. So if there is anyone else who would like to sign up, that QR code is up there just for one more minute. Okay, we are going to get started this evening with Mr. Jake Nichols. Jake, if you could raise your hand for me, sir. I see you way over here. Following Jake will be Reverend Mark Hodge. Reverend, if you would raise your hand. I see you, sir, in the red shirt. We'll bring a microphone to you. Just a reminder, we've all got a couple of minutes or so. And with that, Mr. Nichols, please feel free to go ahead and get started.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jake Nichols, and I'm the instructional supervisor at Dyersburg Intermediate School in Dyersburg, Tennessee. Thank you for allowing us time to speak tonight. I have a deep appreciation for the fiscal responsibility we all have in public education and want to emphasize the expectation we have of keeping public education dollars with public schools. When considering how to restructure the funding of education in Tennessee, please do not consider school vouchers, educational savings accounts, or any other funding formula that would funnel tax dollars away from the public schools that currently work extremely hard to educate Tennessee students. In an effort to appeal to our consumerism mindset, proponents of school vouchers try to promote school reform by emphasizing economic principles such as competition and consumer choice. For that premise to apply, one would have to assume that the student is the product and that schools are the factories that produce that product. Applying capitalistic principles to public education reform misses the mark completely. Students are not widgets and schools are not factories, even though our public school system model still mirrors the industrial age from whence it was born. A literate electorate body of citizens was at the forefront of the minds of the founders of our country in order to ensure quality of life as well as maintain the success of a fragile American democracy. This purpose for a universal public education is now built on the ideal that all students, regardless of demographic or geographic origins, are due a quality education. True public education reform lies in a qualitative approach, not a quantitative one that is shrouded in economic principles and disguised as a voucher. School vouchers, if implemented, would widen the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. There are critics and supporters alike when it comes to school vouchers. However, current and past research does not support any clear discernible difference that school vouchers would increase student achievement. In fact, educational researcher John Hattie cites that once you account for the economic background of students, private schools compared to public schools offered no significant advantages on average. We would not do justice for the sake of time reviewing all the research that criticizes the possible impact school vouchers would have on our current educational system. As you consider the feedback from the various town hall meetings across the state, please keep in mind that school vouchers have no place in a new educational funding formula. Public schools in Tennessee reflect the values of the communities in which they reside. Many of these communities are rich with excellence in educating students. Please rely on these communities as a standard for school reform and not vouchers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nichols. Next up is Reverend Mark Hodge. Following Reverend Hodge will be Mike Peary. Mike, if you would raise your hand. I see you right here, sir. We'll bring a microphone to you. And then it will be Jennifer Medford, and I see you right next door. All right, with that, Mr. Hodge, please go ahead and get started.
Reverend Mark Hodge, pastor of First Assembly of God in Humboldt, Tennessee. I am the Ward 3 school board member for Humboldt City Schools and also the TLN representative for Humboldt City Schools. My comment, I hope it's under the purview of this meeting, but there is some concern, and through the TSBA, our conference we just come back from, we're concerned about after all the town hall meetings have been held and the team has compiled all the information, will there be another time for at least our superintendents or the boards to see that information before it goes to legislation? And that way we could almost, after everything has been compiled, have a better idea of what is going to be handed in beyond all of the great ideas that you're getting across the state. So that would be a concern for us, being able to see that compiled information before it gets into the hand of legislators to make a decision upon. Thank you.
Commissioner, I know you will want us to respond to that one. Yes, ma'am.
I do questions too, so I'm inviting that, even though I know that's I'm not supposed to. Yes, so all the town halls, for example, are online. Those will be transcribed and made public. As Chelsea had said earlier, all public comment that's received, so that is in writing, if it is verbally provided in a town hall setting, answers in our Twitter town hall, so those will all be screenshot, and essentially any feedback received to the department goes to a single email address. All of that is publicly available. So that's kind of step one. Once we have kind of compiled all of these comments and hundreds of comments and get to the point where we are actually constructing a formula, because again, I know it might be hard to believe, but there is not some secret formula in a filing cabinet somewhere. We are literally using this feedback to construct something together. That will be made public for additional public comment and feedback. So you'll have a number of ways to see what's come in, and then also to respond to something likely in the middle of January. That is essentially kind of what we are looking at in terms of depending on what we receive. If we don't receive anything that warrants anything, then we won't do something with it. But assuming that we get really good feedback and can build something, you will absolutely be able to see that in advance.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our next public comment is from Mr. Mike Peary. Following Mike Peary will be Jennifer Medford, who is sitting right next to Mr. Peary. I'm going to ask for TJ Van Dyke to go ahead and raise his hand. I see you, sir. We'll bring a microphone over to you next. With that, Mr. Peary, please go ahead and get started.
I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm with West Tennessee Pbs. We are here to serve y'all. We're here to help educate your children. It is all free. We are Channel 11. You may know us as WLJT. And I've been in this business long enough to know that I want to thank Senator Jackson and Senator Stevens and Representative Hurt and Griffey for being here. I know these men, they're good men, and they have ears. They listen. So I appreciate them being here. Thank y'all for allowing West Tennessee Pbs to serve you. We have cards here. We're here to help educate your children if you have at-home learning, children with disabilities, or a new niche. If you have children at home who do not have the internet, or do not have fiber, or cannot afford it, I've got a little solution. It's called data casting. Now, you got to be within my tower, but come see me. If you're a teacher and you have children who cannot get on the internet, if your teacher's handing out packets and thick papers to kids, I can take care of that, maybe solve your problem. Just give me a shout after this meeting. And I'll hand you to Jennifer, who's with our education department.
I'm Jennifer Medford. I work for West Tennessee Pbs. I am the manager of education and community engagement. Prior to coming to PBS, I've taught in the school systems here in Carroll County. So I'm very familiar with what you all are going through. And when I look at that new formula, I lived in 8 different states prior to coming to Tennessee. So I've seen education at greatest and at some low spots. And when I look at that funding, I'm looking at every single county. I cover 17 counties, and the needs are different for each county. The needs are different for primary, middle, and high school. That formula needs to show that. Primary is going to need more teachers to get what they need to get them up. That may mean more aides in the classroom to help that student achieve that goal of minimum. But I don't want to see a minimum as an educator. I want to see them rise above that, and we cannot do that with just one teacher teaching 15 to 20 students in a primary school. Then you think about special needs. Their needs are different than a normal student that doesn't have it. So when you're looking at that formula, you got that base, and then you got that special needs, but then you also got that normal child that we need to bump up. So we need something there for that child, as well as what he said, equity. We need equity. So when you think about that higher group, what are we doing with that higher group anymore? I mean, I know mine was in a higher group this last year and just graduated. You know, COVID was difficult, but she didn't have anything to help boost her past what she could do because it was COVID. So we got stuck with COVID on that, but we still need that higher range and that equity formula into all the students. So we're achieving every single need of that child and that desire, what they want to be when they leave school. So that's what I have to say, and I'm here to support all of you that are in education because I've been there and I've seen it. And it's hard work, and you guys are underpaid for what you do. And I hope that when you do that, you look at that teacher in front of that student, because that student can't get anywhere without that teacher.
Thank you so much to Mr. Peary and Ms. Medford. Appreciate both of you all. Our next speaker is over here, TJ Van Dyke. Following Mr. Van Dyke will be Ann Johnson. Ann, if you could raise your hand. Yes, ma'am, I see you right in the middle here, and we will bring a microphone to you. With that, Mr. Van Dyke, please go ahead and get started.
Good evening. I'm currently in my 13th year of teaching public high school in Tennessee, and I'm the father of 4 children, all products of the public education system of this great state. Everything that I'd like to address tonight, I think should be considered at the base level of this new funding program. And the first thing, our children must feel comfortable and safe in our public schools. If they don't feel those things, they're not going to be able to learn. We need the state funding to make those things happen. There are campuses all over our state that are literally falling apart, that don't have the correct climate systems and things like that. Now, luckily, I work in a district that's not that way, but there are districts all around us that do have those types of things in their buildings, and state funding should be able to take care of that, because children can't learn if the walls around them are crumbling or if they're cold. And students also need to feel healthy in order to learn. Currently, school nurses in this state are funded at the ratio of 1 nurse for every 3,000 students, and there's not a single district in this state who could have a nurse in every single school. And as we have seen over the past 18 months or so, we know how important a school nurse in every building is to be. We need that connection with healthcare in our buildings for our children to feel safe and healthy and like they have that comfort level of someone to go to. And with that, mental health. We have really seen over the past 18 months the mental health of our children, of ourselves as teachers, on the decline. And if the state of Tennessee really does care so much about the mental health of our students and our staff, then we need to have funding for people such as behavioral specialists, school counselors, and things like that at a much higher ratio for that to be able to happen appropriately. And as most anybody in education knows, there are children who do not function well at the traditional school level. So at every school district, there should be a facility for alternative learning. And that needs to be a place that could be beneficial to students who, whether it be behavioral problems or mental mental health issues or whatever, that they need to be in a different placement. That could be beneficial for them as well as the students in the traditional setting. But ultimately, the safety of our students is top priority, and the safety may involve cameras and radios, etc., for metal detectors for administrators to use. But really, the main goal of this is SROs in every single school. Hopefully, we never have the need for an SRO in a school, but we don't want to find out that we did, because something like that could turn deadly, and we don't want that for any of our children or any of our staff, for anybody for that matter. So funding for those basic needs to be at that base level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Van Dyke. Our next speaker is Ann Johnson. She's sitting right here in the middle. Following Ms. Johnson will be Scott Self. Scott, if you could raise your hand for me. Scott, oh, I see, yes, sir, in the Ole Miss sweatshirt. All right. With that, Ms. Johnson, please go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes.
Hello, I'm Ann Johnson. I'm an agriculture teacher. My colleagues and I represent the Tennessee Association of Agriculture Educators. So obviously, one of our major concerns is career and technical education, and we want to ensure that in the new funding, that career and technical education not only remains there, but doesn't get cut, obviously, like it has. My fear is our focus is on student-focused public education, which we all agree is important, but some of the current BEP funding, in regards to CTE, when an outsider reads it, may see it as teacher-oriented instead of student-oriented, and without that teacher in the programs that are in there, when we look at the formula, CTE students gain more ADM than a regular student, but it talks about teacher pay, it talks about material and supplies, it talks about travel, and all of those things are important for our career and technical education students. Just this past year and a half ago, I was able to serve on the Ag Ed Task Force for the governor to look at education in regards to agricultural education. And during those meetings came out where we talked about extended day pay that is being mirrored in the state of Georgia. And that is where, as you know, I'm assuming, Commissioner, that CTE teacher classroom size is different than a regular teacher because those students that are looking at career skill jobs need more hands-on, one-on-one with the teacher. In that state, some of those students that need extra time with the teacher have that 1 hour after the day. And it truly is an extended day, which might look like for teacher benefit, but in reality, it is for student benefit. We mentioned this in an Ag Ed meeting, but that's true for all CTE courses, not just agriculture. And that's one of the things that we would like to see considered when we talk about this funding, just with the Blue Oval City that's coming in here in West Tennessee. We are preparing for career jobs for our students, and that's going to have to happen with teachers and students getting them trained and ready to take those jobs. So those are our high points of things that we want to make sure stay included in the formula is the CTE ADM.
Thank you so much, Ms. Johnson. Our next speaker is Mr. Scott Self. Following Mr. Self will be Justin Weaver. Justin, if you could raise your hand, I see you way down here in the front. All right, with that, Mr. Self, please go ahead and get started.
Commissioner, I want to thank you for the opportunity to voice our opinions this evening. My name is Scott Self. I'm a member of the Dyersburg City School Board of Education. When considering the new funding for the new formula for funding education, there are two specific components I'd like to address briefly. First of all, in my 11 years of board experience, I've learned that we can spend a tremendous amount of money on technology, professional development, curriculum, facilities, and a plethora of other items. But if we do not have quality educators in front of our students, we will struggle. The vast majority of teachers in Tennessee chose this profession because of a desire and a passion to educate children. However, they did not take a vow of poverty in order to teach, even though our commitment to them financially may suggest otherwise. I believe that the future economic growth and success of Tennessee will rely heavily on the success of our education system. And in order for our system to thrive, we must acknowledge the importance of our teachers with significant compensation packages. Additionally, we must create financial incentives for our best and brightest students to return to Tennessee and more specifically to enter the teaching profession. Our best and most impactful educational tool is our teachers, period. If we as the state are going to get really serious about our future, we must recruit and retain the finest teachers, and we must compensate them accordingly. Secondly, there was a time when teachers could focus their energies primarily on teaching their curriculum. As time has progressed, our teachers are having to wear many more hats. Our kids come from environments that most of us can't comprehend. Our kids have social issues that math and chemistry teachers are just not equipped to handle. School counselors must become a more prominent piece of the funding formula. This past weekend, I attended the TSBA meeting in Nashville, and on Friday, we heard from Dr. Stephen Lloyd, who is a medical director for 2 different drug recovery centers in Middle Tennessee. With regard to childhood drug usage, where the age of first contact is becoming younger and younger, he had this to offer. He said, for those who are using drugs, drugs aren't the problem, they're the solution. More and more children are turning to drugs as a coping mechanism for the troubles of the world in which they live. We must equip our schools with proper trained individuals to help these kids navigate these tough waters.
Improved teacher compensation and and increased school counseling funding, in my opinion, are two critical areas that must be considered in the new funding formula. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Self. Next up is Justin Weaver, who is down in the front. Following Justin will be Laura Hunt. Laura, if you would raise your hand, please, ma'am. Way in the back. I see Scott's right there with the microphone. Okay, Mr. Weaver, please go ahead and get started.
Justin Weaver with the Trenton Special School District Board of Trustees. Just a few short comments about tonight's meeting. Any change in the funding formula, should have public funds stay with public schools. There should not be any way to divert those funds in the future at a later date, with formulas usually lasting 25, 30 years, like the last one has. We need to make sure they will stay with public schools and not any way be able to divert to other private entities later. Any change in funding formula, should address teacher and staff shortages. We've heard that a lot tonight. Bus drivers, nurses, school counselors, anything of that nature that the schools, have shortages on. Then also any change in public formula should allow for local flexibility. Not all districts are the same. As you've mentioned, we have urban, suburban, rural, and each district has different needs, and there should be some local flexibility on how those dollars can be spent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Weaver. We are just about rounding home base on speakers tonight, folks. We've got Laura Hunt in the back. Following Laura Hunt, I have the last speaker signed up is Diana Mitchell. So Diana, if you would please raise your hand, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I see you. We'll bring a microphone to you. With that, Laura, please go ahead and get started.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Laura Hunt. I'm the State Manager of Advocacy and Strategy with Tennessee Can. I want to thank the Commissioner for putting on all these town halls. I've been at all 7 now. There's 1 left. And so I work out of Nashville, but I'm an advocacy manager all across the state, and we are definitely in support at Tennessee Can of a student-based funding formula. We're hoping that with this funding formula, it would allow for more supports for special needs and students with disabilities, for ESL students, for low-income students, for rural students, and then the wraparound services that kind of go along with some of those things. So more school counselors, school nurses, interventionists, RTI specialists, social workers, all those things, and more transparency for parents to be able to advocate for those services being applied to their child and for them to know exactly how the dollars are spent on their children. So with that being said, in order to better explain what this student-based funding formula might look like, I've been hosting different calls at different points in time, and so I hosted one already, but the next one I'm going to have is Wednesday, December 1st at 5:30 p.m. I'll be around afterwards. I have flyers and business cards if you're interested in kind of learning more about what, really breaking down what the current BEP looks like and what a student-based funding formula could look like. And I also host calls monthly with teachers and principals all across the state, just so they can stay informed about what's happening with the legislator, as this is a short runway, but it's going to move quickly through the legislator. So, and I thank those legislators that are in attendance tonight and for their support. So yeah, we're really excited about the possibility of a student-based funding formula and hoping it'll really improve the education system here in Tennessee.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hunt. Our last speaker is Ms. Diana Mitchell. She's sitting right in the middle. With that, Ms. Mitchell, please feel free to go get started.
Good evening. I'm Diana Mitchell, and I'm a mathematics teacher at Dyersburg Middle School. As students come to my classroom, I'm seeing more and more students who are very far behind, and they need so much help. There are so many of them now, and it's very hard to give all of them the amount of attention that they need for their specific need. I hear the same thing from many other educators, so I know that the need is there. I believe that we have a critical need for a substantial increase in the number of interventionists in our schools to help one-on-one with these students. I know it's costly, but our students need it. They need more help than a single teacher can give. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mitchell. That will conclude our public comment for the evening. I think everyone who signed up has had a chance to speak. Commissioner, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chelsea. I can turn the microphone on. I wanted to also open it up, as I have been in town halls, to see if there are questions. I know it's really, sometimes it's a little hard to speak up and have any comments, especially when you're in a large group of people. So I'm constantly reminded by my elder daughter that not everybody likes that, Mommy. But people might have questions, and so certainly want to make sure that if you don't have a comment but do have a question similar to what we heard earlier, that I am here and happy to answer that if one comes up. So I want to make sure I open that opportunity.
Yeah, please go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question. We'll bring a microphone to you.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Could you expand on the timeline of how this funding formula rollout will look in conjunction with the legislation and things like that?
Sure. So right now, and so starting mid-October through the end of January, is just public engagement and comment. So what we've committed to is to listen and to hear and to build something that can then potentially be considered. That will be up to the General Assembly about whether they believe it makes sense to move forward at this time and whether they decide to move that through the legislative process. That is certainly not something, and I would defer to four of them in the room, and I do want to say Northwest has the best participation of our General Assembly, so good job. But one of the things that we are looking at is just to give the General Assembly something to work with, saying if we are at a point where we want to move forward, and we have heard, I think overwhelmingly, especially over the last several years, that building something new is something that lots of folks are really interested in, that covers public comment across the state, that people have the opportunity to participate in whatever way makes sense for them, whether that is in person, sending emails, in a Twitter town hall, et cetera, and that when we have something to produce, it is the product of all of those voices together. So ideally, we'll have something in really good shape by the end of January. Folks can consider that. If they entertained that this session, then that would move through the traditional legislative process, and I would defer to them on that process.
Other questions? Way back here. Scott, you've got a microphone for this gentleman.
Thank you very much. Dr. Frank Thomas from Humboldt, Tennessee, Humboldt City School teacher. I was around in 1984, the Education Reform Bill of 1984, so I have some background. But as listening to the conversation tonight, I wondered, will we be operating on the ADM, average daily attendance, in funding this time as we pursue the new approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for those folks who just, very quick primers, different states calculate attendance in different ways. It might be by membership, it could be on attendance. Some states look at that every month. Some pick specific months like we do here in Tennessee. It actually is different everywhere. And so one of the things that we are asking for direct feedback specifically from our superintendents is what they would like to see. Does it make sense to calculate that on a monthly basis, to continue it to be several times per year? Like I said, every state does it a little bit differently. There's pros and cons to both. With a student-based funding formula, what happens is because it is funding the needs of that individual child, if that child moves from District A to District B, when you have something that's every month, you can capture that with more accuracy. If you have it more spread out throughout the year, you don't necessarily get that. And so there's like I said, there's trade-offs for each of those decisions, but we are opening up that conversation and are looking specifically to superintendents and school boards to be able to give us the feedback on what makes the most sense. Do we keep it the same? Do we adjust it in what ways? One of the things that as you are giving feedback, I would really encourage you all to think about, especially in this part of the state, and I've talked to a couple of directors about this. There's what exists right now, and then there's what will be and can be 5 years from now. So when you have a Ford plant that's been built out, the needs of what your students have, what you will want to think about from a local contribution perspective, what your tax base looks like, that's all going to change pretty significantly over the next 10 years. And so that's something that, again, is pretty unique to this part of the state, although Tennessee's economy is exploding in lots of different places. There's a big transformational change that will happen in this broader area. And so as you are thinking about that in the local context and what that means for your students here, it will be important to think not just about the right now, but what will be true in 5 years and 10 years so that you're making decisions for the future and not just for the present. So I just encourage you all to think about that.
Additional questions? I've been looking for hands. Yes, ma'am. We'll bring a microphone. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have your hand up first, sir? I'm so sorry. we'll go to this gentleman in the front, and then we'll come back to Ms. Medford. Yes, thank you.
My question, I know the focus is obviously to craft something for the state of Tennessee and the students within the state. As you're going about this, are there other states that have a similar approach on which you would model this, or which we can draw some success stories from moving forward?
Yeah, great question. So I will not necessarily say there's a state where I would say yes, that state, let's just kind of copy and paste. I think I always feel like Tennessee can do better than everybody else, and so I want to keep that. But most states have moved to student-based funding. So if you look at, there's a great website that's neutral. It just does kind of objective information, Education Commission of the States. And they actually have a pretty easy feature where you can sort school funding formulas in all 50. And what we know is that 39 states right now have moved from a resource base, which means you're funding ratios or aggregates of students, and they've moved to a student-based formula because it's more specific and targeted to the needs of children. And so you've seen that is the movement. People aren't moving back, they're moving to student-based. The states that have most recently changed their funding models have been Texas, Ohio, and Maryland. Those are the three most recent, completely different states, did completely different things, but all have moved to a more student-based funding system, largely with a lot of compromise, I would say, especially when you're looking at Texas and Maryland in particular. Ohio kind of had a restart and then just passed it recently. But most states have moved to the student base. I don't know if I would copy any of them directly, but I think there's some good things to learn from all three of those, as well as many others who have moved to this type of formula.
Yeah, and I'll just mention the resource that the Commissioner shared, Education Commission of the States. It is posted on our website, and we can get that information for you, so if you're interested, you know where to reach us. All right, we have a question from Ms. Medford, and then I'll ask if there are additional hands, additional questions. All right, Ms. Medford, go ahead.
When you're looking at the old formula, it was like 70-30. When you're going into that new formula, is the state going to provide like the 70% and then local 30 still?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think a much bigger one. So when we think about school funding, it's complex, right? It's billions of dollars, and that's a massive responsibility. Part of what we look at is the actual formula. So that means all the money that comes in, how is that distributed? Then there's this local match component. The local match can change, it can stay the same. It's essentially that calculation of what percent. So when we're looking at the new formula, what we want to be true is that certainly we get stronger and better outcomes for kids, and we fund in a way that gets us those purposeful outcomes. But we also want to make sure that if and when the General Assembly adds money to the formula or makes changes or wants to know that kind of what the return on investment has been in terms of additional funds they put in every year, which they do, that we actually have a formula that they feel really confident in is going to produce those outcomes, and that we're able to report on that. The local match conversation is one that we're going to have with school board members, superintendents, county commissioners, and for those special school districts and municipals, their business and city managers, to be able to figure out what makes the most sense for that local match. Whether or not it's the BEP or a new formula, we do know that that is a very critical conversation that people want to have. Lots of people have a lot of feelings about the local match conversation, and that needs to be separate from the formula itself. So both of those will happen, but just know that's happening in a separate space because it is about what makes the most sense and is fair for all of our different types of districts, and we have quite a few different types of districts in this state. So thank you for that question.
We've got time for a few more questions, folks. Any additional questions? Just raise your hand. Yes, sir. Right up front. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I want to thank Governor Lee, and thank you for having these public town halls, give everyone a chance to speak and listen to some of the proposals. My question is this: as part of the consideration of redoing the formulation, has there been any thought, we've got a challenge trying to get our reading and math scores up in Tennessee. Has there been any thought or consideration as far as considering this BEP refunding reformulation, somehow incentivizing to reward those schools and those districts that are doing a good job in meeting the goals and the target goals for the state as far as reading and math scores? So thank you.
Thank you for that question. So that's part of what we've been soliciting feedback on. And so we've heard, I think, a pretty strong array of feedback on that right now. It's what we call an outcomes component to a school funding system. Now, some states have that, some states don't. Two examples is Maryland has that now, Florida and Texas are three examples of states that have outcomes in their formula. In some states, that is based on things like closing achievement gaps. In some states, that is based on additional support for third grade reading or seventh grade benchmarks. In other states, it's about completers, so students who have completed a CTE pathway, students who have earned an industry certification or credential, students who have passed an AP exam. Those districts, especially when it's the students who are either economically disadvantaged, English learners, or students with disabilities, would get additional funding for specific outcomes. So that is something we've actually gotten quite a bit of public comment about across the board, all the different feelings on that, but it is something that we're actively considering, and I appreciate being able to talk about that. Thank you, sir.
Other questions? I know it's getting just about dinner time. I see one right here in the middle. Yes, ma'am.
I guess mine's just a clarifying question. You stated that we're going to start completely fresh. We're not going to use the old formula as a base to go by. So if items are not brought up in the town hall and they're in the old formula, will they have the potential to fall through the cracks? Is that what I'm hearing? Or are we going to take a look at what's in the old formula to ensure that something doesn't get left out? Because oftentimes when we transpose something, things just don't make it.
Yeah, so that's a great clarification. So let me clarify the two. So as you all know, or many of you likely know, there are current litigation reasons why we will not be talking about the BEP at all. So we say, you're over here, and then we are going to move way over here and talk about something new. But that still means that there are statutes and policies that have been enacted around things like CTE, around third grade reading, transportation, et cetera. So if we are currently funding it, a new formula wouldn't discount that. We actually have quite a few different attorneys going through and saying, where is every single thing that's funded in the BEP? And as many of you know, a lot is funded outside of the BEP because it's really hard to work within that. And so what we are talking about is the way in which the funding is calculated and how that's distributed to schools. The policies that have been passed on what is funded, that is not something that we would necessarily change unless we get a lot of feedback on one particular thing. So CTE, I think you brought up as an example, a great example of something that frankly continues to be, remains, and will likely be accelerated as a priority in the state. That will absolutely be something that would be carried over. So this isn't about kind of cutting, it's more about making sure that as things are allocated, it's done in a way that is very clear, transparently done, and publicly available to families, communities, et cetera. But great question.
All right, folks. Any final questions? I think we've exhausted just about all of them. I do not want to leave anybody hanging. Yes, sir, right over here.
There's no way.
No way.
Director Hassel does not have a question.
There we go. Here's a microphone coming down to you, sir. Please go ahead.
I told my wife I would be quiet, but no. Seriously, on voluntary pre-K, do you think we will see voluntary pre-K rolled into the formula, or will it be separate, you think?
So we've had not a lot, but some public comment on that already. So there is, I think, some strong interest of having that, whether that is funded as a 100% or whether that is funded as a percent. I think that there has been a lot of feedback that the accountability on those dollars would be best served within a formula, but it doesn't necessarily change how many dollars go to VPK. But I think that there has been some interest in keeping that a pre-K through 12 so that everything's funded with a similar kind of weight, especially for economically disadvantaged students, et cetera. So that's something that we've heard a lot about.
And as a follow-up to that, and Representative Griffith's comment about incentivizing, while I understand that, 90% of the conversation I've heard tonight has been based on needs for nurses, counselors, social workers, school psychologists. And while our state achievement test is a great test, it tests knowledge. It does not test a child's ability to read. So if I'm a student sitting in Haywood County and I've not had access to trips to New York or dealings with archaeology or maybe schools around the world, if I've not had access to that, I may be a great reader, but I may not have knowledge to comprehend what I'm reading. So I hope our elected officials will know what our state assessment does, and it does not test a child's ability to read. If you look at our test scores, they're not very good. But if you come and sit down in third grade classrooms in Haywood County, 85 to 90% of our kids can read, and they tell you what they're reading. But in order for us to cover the knowledge to meet a test like that, It ain't happening. Forgive me, English teachers. So let's just be careful that we incentivize the right thing, because otherwise we're cutting our nose off to spite our face. Thank you.
Thank you all. All right, I think we have gotten through all of the comments tonight. I want to thank everyone for participating. I want to take just one moment to remind you all of this email account. We really, really would love to hear from you. Send us your comments in writing. I know several of you who spoke this evening had a printout in front of you. You are welcome to hand that to us and we will scan it in, but just really want to see as much public comment as we possibly can. So take me up on that offer. Commissioner, would you close us out for the evening?
Happy to. I just want to say thank you for everyone coming out. If you are on a subcommittee, because I see actually a few of you are participating in that way, can you just give a wave? I see some of us have driven. And so we've got a lot of subcommittee members, but I think no surprise to anyone, we have one of our student subcommittee members. So would you mind standing up so we can give you a round of applause, because y'all have been pretty incredible. Yeah. I do want to just say I've been able to pop in. All of our subcommittee meetings are online. So again, from a transparency perspective, when you want to hear what's being discussed, et cetera, those all get posted online. You can view those and hear the conversation. Part of what we want to do is continue to build, right? So this is about baseline conversations. What do we want to be true? Where's our starting point? We'll start to get more information on, well, here's what other states are doing. Here are things you might want to consider. Here is something that we've never considered in Tennessee and might want to. And what we've gotten so far is pretty incredible feedback. But I did want to call out our student subcommittee members because, no surprise, it's always going to be my favorite, and they have been on top of everything. I think they've all got all sorts of chats and office hours and things. So very, very impressed with our young people. And also just want to thank everybody for showing up and being part of the conversation. This is really, really important for students. It is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for us to come together as a single state, as all Tennesseans, and figure out what we want to be true for kids. I think there's very little that is more important than that, because schools are part of what builds our future as a state. And I am very, very appreciative that so many of you care so much about our students to show up, lend your voice. I encourage you to continue to do that. You don't have to submit one comment. We've got folks who make a comment every single day, and I just love that. I'm making new friends through email. So continue to do that and know that I read them. And I genuinely, there are a few that I will be calling you back this week, and so excited to have conversations that continue. But thank you very much. Appreciate it, and please, please stay engaged. Also just want to thank our, like I said, our General Assembly members. We have 4, and that is more than we've had in the others. So thank you, sir, for being here tonight. Really appreciate your support. Thank you all very much. Have a happy Thanksgiving.